Back in 2021, when the Polestar 2 launched, I said some very nice things about it. Finally, I thought, a genuine Tesla Model 3 rival that brought with it European driving dynamics and a cool Scando style at what seemed like a reasonable price. The thing is, the electric car market has changed a lot since then. There are now more affordable options, there's now longer range, higher performance options, and the question is, was I wrong? Should the Polestar 2 really be the car for your driveway, or should you pick something else now? To find out, I've been living with one for 4 months, just over 3,000 kilometers, and what the car tells me is 85 hours behind the wheel. To find out, is it actually as good as I said it was? Should you own one? Would I own one? Let's find out. Before we get into all the details on what I discovered, let's talk about which Polestar 2 we've grabbed. You can get into an entry-level model from just $63,900, but the one we have for this test is the long-range single motor, which at the time of writing cost $68,400 before on-roads. Our car also had both option boxes ticked, the Pilot Pack and the Plus Pack, which add more luxury and safety features but lift the total price significantly to $84,464. Standard gear on our car though includes 19-inch alloy wheels, an 11.2-inch center display with always online connectivity and an Android Automotive operating system, a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster, leather steering wheel, LED headlights, and power adjust for the seats. The Plus Pack adds the panoramic sunroof, which annoyingly doesn't come with a shade, a premium 13-speaker audio system, and WeaveTech vegan upholstery. Of course, all of this will be mixed up shortly because the deeply updated version of the Polestar 2 will arrive before the end of 2023. This car will make a big switch to rear-wheel drive from the front-wheel drive version we're testing here, and will also bring a higher level of standard equipment and a longer range battery too. Make sure to check out all of our content on carsguide.com.au, where we already have a review of the incoming car from overseas, and a more comprehensive breakdown of all of this car's features as well as my long-term chapters. Now, design is a big deal for Polestar because this is an unusual looking vehicle, and the brand's CEO is actually a designer himself, responsible for concept versions of not only this car, but the Volvo XC40 as well. And the relationship to Volvo is seen in these Thor's hammer lights and the open grille here as well, although it is a little different. It's a little bit more anonymous and misses the chrome treatment that Volvos get. It's designed to separate the brands a little bit, which will happen more as Polestar develops into larger and more different models to its Volvo relations. Some other features you might note here is the high ride height for a sedan looking car and the color matching badge. Interesting. In fact, the Polestar 2 will probably be the closest related to Volvos as the brand moves away from that design language and is something that's very much its own. The rear angle of this car is perhaps its most interesting aspect. Is it a crossover, a hatchback, a sedan? In a way, it's all three, and it's another example of the new, unconventional and exciting design thinking which is emerging in this electric era. At least we can all be glad it's not just another SUV. The Polestar 3 large SUV, and of course the Polestar 4 coupe SUV, are set to continue this trend, with the latter even lacking a rear window in favour of a fully digital rear vision setup. Hopping in the inside of the Polestar 2, and there's some really great design choices and some things that I found interesting that I didn't notice when this car launched. But starting with the choices of materials and colors, it is a bit grayscale in here. There's gray, black, and more gray, but the material choices are super interesting because you've got these kind of recycled plastic panels in here. There's a bit of wood grain. There's a mix of gloss and chrome. But you've also got these interesting kind of cloth materials in the doors and across the dash. You've got a kind of neoprene material for the seats too. So I just think that this car really does express itself differently from other vehicles in here. Now, a few things I have noticed in my time with the car is these materials might not age super well. I feel like the gloss plastics, the chromes, and the hard finishes of a lot of these materials, they might not age particularly well over time as they kind of scratch up and collect dust and that sort of stuff. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. And another thing, just from a practicality front straight away, is this cabin feels very much closed in compared to the big open space of a lot of its EV rivals, and particularly the Model 3, which has a very minimalist design compared to this very sort of closed in and sporty feel that the Polestar 2 offers. And that's not to say that this car doesn't get some things right, which you wish the Tesla Model 3 did. Firstly, you've got an actual instrument cluster, so the driver doesn't have to look to the middle screen to see the core functions of the car. And the software is really nice and simple and easily laid out too. So when you do need to use those touch functions, you've got nice big touch panels on this screen. You've got nice tabulated designs. There's just not too much you have to click through and tiny little buttons you have to press like there is, not just on the Tesla, but a lot of its rivals as well. But it doesn't get everything right. There are a few areas where things started to get on my nerves a little bit that I didn't think they would. For a start, the hard material down the dash here. If you do drive this car around in hot weather, like you're wearing shorts, then your skin sort of starts to grate on this hard plastic material like it should be a soft material. That was something weird that I picked up on in my time with the car. And also, the storage in here is a little bit lacking. So you do get a sort of large bottle holder in the door pocket down there, big enough for this bottle here, and a large one in this center console here, but it is the only one, unless you open up this console box and there's a second one in there. But you have to choose. You can either have an armrest or two bottle holders. It's kind of annoying if you've got a passenger and you've got two coffees. On the whole though, the seat comfort is quite good. And if it is just you in this car, which I think is the intention for the Polestar 2, it's designed as a very individualistic vehicle, you can shift this armrest console forward, and then it's like you're sitting in a fancy Scandinavian armchair. I don't mind that. And the way your hand sits here on the console raised up, you can just sort of flick the indicator on or off and just touch the screen really easily with somewhere to rest your arm. Nice touch, but different from everything else, and it doesn't have the big open spaces that a lot of its EV rivals have. Let's go take a look at the back seat. Okay, so in the back seat, one of the first things we have to talk about is how far this door opens, because that's actually the maximum, and it's a big thick door too, so you might have trouble actually fitting a child seat in here or getting kids in and out, or even a pet, whatever you're going to put in this back seat here. And interestingly, I've seen a lot of these cars as Ubers, so I think this like door angle doesn't make it the ideal Uber. Your passengers might have trouble getting in and out of this car. Once you're in though, it's pretty damn good for outboard passengers. So as you can see, I'm sitting here, that's behind my own driving position. At 182 centimeters tall, I've got enough knee room, and I've got just enough headroom as well for this top bit here and for the roof. I've sat people in here which are actually taller than me, and I haven't actually had any complaints about the space in the back seat. So I think it's pretty good on that front. Although I will note this middle seat is pretty useless for, especially for adults, because it's got a huge raise in the console down there. Now, why does it have that? It's because it's based on the same platform as the Volvo XC40, and that car needs it to facilitate the all-wheel drive. But because this is an EV, well, it's naturally compromised by having to have that raise in the tunnel there, which is a bit of a shame. Amenity-wise, we've got a big bottle holder in the doors there. We've got nice elastic pockets on the backs of the front seats, and in a drop-down armrest, there's a further two massive cup holders as well. And as I mentioned in the front seat, these cool materials kind of continue into the doors and for the seat trim as well. You've got two adjustable air vents, although there's no rear climate zone, but you do get two outboard heated seats, which is kind of rare and nice to see because it's more energy efficient in an EV to have heated seats than just use the aircon. And you've got a power outlet down there as well. Now, like any good EV, the Polestar 2 has a frunk, although honestly, in all my time driving EVs around, I find I hardly use these. It's not big enough for any baggage or anything, so obviously your best use of it is your charging cables. Those do fit in there quite nicely, and it will shut there as well. You've got a repair kit hidden away in a cool kind of Scando design look sort of thing. But again, look, I don't find these are particularly useful. I use the boot more often, and the boot is actually quite plentiful in this car. On the topic of rear cargo space, the Polestar 2's boot measures in at 405 litres and has a pop-up divider built into the false floor. Underneath is a cavernous area good for holding charging cables, although this car only comes with an inflator kit stored in the frunk. Our Polestar 2 is powered by a front-mounted electric motor producing 170 kilowatts and 330 newton meters. It's not quite as powerful as some of its EV rivals, but you can overcorrect this by splurging for the performance version, which literally doubles the performance figures by adding a second unit on the rear axle. Now, it is impossible to talk about electric car value without also talking about how much range you can travel on a full charge. And the only way you can tell which Polestar 2 you've got is by this little sticker down here. This one is a 78 kilowatt hour version, and that gives it a WLTP certified range of 515 kilometers, at least at present. It is subject to change as software updates roll out for this car. Is that enough? Well, let's get into that. Interestingly, the car would show between 450 and 490 k's of range on a full charge, although I found this calculation to be often pessimistic. In reality, it would travel about 480 kilometers, which is still short of the 515 kilometer claim, but a decent range nonetheless. Now the Polestar 2 can charge at a maximum rate of a little over 150 kilowatts, allowing it to charge from 10 to 80% in roughly half an hour. But on the more common 50 kilowatt DC units, which you'll find around town, expect that to take a little over an hour on 50 kilowatts. Now, on AC, you can charge up at a rate of 11 kilowatts, which is pretty good. It allows you to get about 70 kilometers or so per hour. So it makes it worth plugging in to charge up at your local shops on one of those AC units if you're going for a big grocery shop or to the gym or something. On the road efficiency, I've had a long time to test this. So over the just over 3,000 Ks that I've been driving this car around, we've hit a number of 16.9 kilowatt hours to 100 kilometers. And that's actually less than the claim for this car, which is just over 17 kilowatt hours to 100 kilometers. And so it's surprising to me that we can't quite get to that full 515K range on a full charge. But in the real world, I found driving on the freeway, driving around town, a range that you can realistically expect despite the pessimistic trip computer is more like 480 to 490 Ks. And look, that's close enough to the claim to keep me quite satisfied. So how does the Polestar 2 compare to a lot of its EV rivals? I'm maybe uniquely qualified to tell you because I've driven almost everything that's on the market at the moment. And this car, one thing you notice straight away is how sporting it is. This is a car for maybe a bit of a proper motoring enthusiast. There's a really nice, slick steering tune, which is easy to use at low speeds, but it provides heaps of feedback as you sort of accelerate. And it makes the car feel like sporting, feline, ready to pounce on the road. And the same goes for that suspension tune, which makes the car feel very centered, very firm, and very real. It keeps the weight of those massive batteries really under control when you're in the corners and having a bit of fun in this car. But make no mistake, it is a very firm ride. It shares that in common with the Tesla Model 3 and the Tesla Model Y. And it's just a consequence of having all that extra weight and needing to firm up the suspension to keep it all under control. In our comparisons with the Teslas as well, you do have to keep in mind that this car isn't quite as fast as a Model 3 or a Model Y. It does feel a little bit more tame when you really put your foot down. And that's because you do have 170 kilowatts, 330 Newton meters on tap. It's not an overwhelming amount of power, and it is channeled in this case through the front wheels. So unlike the Tesla, you don't have those rear wheel drive dynamics. And if you really do push it through the corners, you will feel that understeer start to bite in. Of course, that will be fixed with the incoming rear wheel drive version, which lands in Australia before the end of 2023. One thing I will say about the harsh ride in this car though is you get used to it. I've daily driven this car now for 4 months, and in that time I've started to notice the ride less and less as I'm driving it around town, and I'm actually quite used to it. It's only when you hop out of this car and hop into one of its competitors or even a combustion car that's got a softer ride that you really do notice the difference. So really, at the end of the day, it might not be a deal breaker for you. One thing that you can't really solve about that hard ride, and especially with the huge wheels that are served on the higher grades of this car, is the amount of road noise that enters the cabin. Now that's something that you'll notice mainly on the freeway when you're traveling at those higher speeds on harsher tarmac surfaces. It really does start to get to you after a couple of hours, so maybe it's a good thing that you do have to stop every so often and charge. But to drive this car around town, it really does have some great characteristics as an electric vehicle. Prime among them is the single pedal driving mode. Now you can hop into the system and flick through a few modes. There's even a sort of creep forward mode like the Teslas have, so you can make this car behave like it's got a traditional automatic transmission and roll forward at the lights if you let off the brake. But I tend to drive it in the single pedal driving mode, which I find it feels the best, it feels the most efficient, it feels the nicest to drive, especially when you're in traffic. And so you can just use the accelerator pedal to come to a full halt, which you can't do in all of its EV rivals, but it feels so natural and smooth in this car. You can tell that there's been some effort put into actually tuning it, not just letting the motor do what it does. In terms of visibility, other things I've noticed about this car in the time that I've had it is, for me at least, it's really easy to see out of the front of this car, and it's got really good side mirrors as well. Out the back, it's not as good because it is a bit of a letterbox aspect because of the angle of that rear window, and the boot lid is quite high up as well, so it can be a little bit hard to see physically what's behind you, although you do have a really good 360-degree surround camera, and all of those cameras are high definition as well. So you do get a really nice view around you. I find most of the time I just use the reversing camera, which you can switch through using the touchscreen, but it is nice to have that 360-degree view if you're pulling up to a curb and you don't want to scratch the bumper, or if you're pulling into a tight car spot and you want to see where the edges are. But interestingly, my partner, who is much shorter than me, and she's been driving this car around as well, she tells me that she has to raise the seat all the way to its maximum setting so she can see over the dash, because this dash line is actually quite tall, and that's something that I wouldn't have noticed unless I put her behind the wheel. So where does that leave our Polestar 2? Well, I think this is more of a keen driver's car than the Tesla Model 3 is. The Tesla Model 3 feels more for someone who's into their tech products, whereas this car feels more like a car. And I think a lot of buyers, especially keen drivers who are coming out of maybe a hot hatch or something, will enjoy this EV more than a lot of other ones on the market. So that's big praise for this car, and I think it's something that really does set it apart.
Frustratingly, to get the full safety kit on this Polestar 2, you'll still need to splash out for the Pilot Pack, which scores you the missing adaptive cruise control, advanced driver monitoring system, and upgraded pixel LED headlights.
You're quite well looked after for safety equipment in the Polestar 2. Like its Volvo relations, the crash structure and everything is really well put together. It does have that maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating.
For more on the full set of Polestar 2 safety gear, check out the full review at carsguide.com.au.
On the ownership front, you've got the usual sort of 5-year and unlimited kilometre warranty with a separate 8-year warranty for the battery. See the details for that on your screen now. Although what sets the Polestar 2 apart the most is the fact that all of your servicing is covered for the first 5 years. And you also don't have to service this car every year. It's once every 24 months or 30,000 Ks. Pretty damn good if you ask me.
How much does it cost to run an EV like this? Well, I ran some numbers. Taking my total distance traveled and dividing it by my average energy consumption gives me a total consumption of roughly 541 kilowatt hours in my time with the car. If you take a worst case charging scenario of DC fast charging only, the one near me costs about 45 cents per kilowatt hour, and you end up with a rough total energy cost of $250. I can tell you for sure that it cost me less than that as a total, as probably a third of my charging was done off a free solar powered AC unit, so you can reduce that number again. Even taking that worst case energy cost though, a 2-litre turbocharged combustion price rival, like say a BMW 320i, would cost almost double to run over the same distance just in fuel. Not to mention the increased cost and inconvenience of servicing the car twice as often.
4 months, just over 3,000 Ks, 85 hours behind the wheel. Would I personally own a Polestar 2? I think the answer is absolutely. I love this car, but I'm not going to shy away from its flaws. It does have a bit of a hard ride, it's not as practical on the inside as it could be, and objectively, it's just not as good value as the Tesla Model 3. That car gives you a bit more stuff for the same money. Thankfully though, I don't have to walk back what I told you at the launch of this car. The Polestar 2 is still a great EV, especially if you're a keen driver, and especially if it's just a couple. It's maybe less a car for a family buyer compared to some of its rivals out there. Our pick of the range is still this single motor long range version, which offers you the best balance of range and price. And if you've liked what you've seen here, well, tell us, would you buy a Polestar 2 or would you buy a Tesla Model 3 or maybe a Kia Niro or a Hyundai Ioniq 5? Let us know in the comments below.
As always, remember to check out all 3 of our long-term written installments for this review over at carsguide.com.au.